The Desert Archaic Culture. This is the name given the lifeway of the native inhabitants of the arid regions of western North America from about 8,500 to 1,500 years ago. This culture is known to us only through the few tools, fire basins, waste products, and skeletal remains that were left behind as the archaic peoples performed their daily activities. In 1974, the University of Utah was given the opportunity to improve our understanding of the archaic lifeway through the excavation of Sudden Shelter, for it lay in the path of planned interstate freeway construction. Initially, the students of the Archaeological Field Techniques class conducted the excavation under the direction of Professor Jesse D. Jennings. The site is situated a few kilometers east of a low mountain pass in what is now central Utah. The pass forms a natural passage between the deserts of the Great Basin to the west and the deserts of the Colorado Plateau to the east. Both the shelter's location and the protection it offers from the elements surely made it an attractive stopping place for prehistoric peoples. Excavations at Sudden Shelter began with the removal of the uppermost soil levels in several exploratory trenches. As soon as a portion of the highly defined natural stratigraphy was exposed, fill was removed in increments defined by those visible layers. The differing colors of the separate natural strata often result from their cultural content, the products and byproducts of human life subjected through time to a variety of biochemical processes. As each stratigraphic layer is removed, it is passed through a screen to recover any artifacts which may have been present in it. Some deposits that have been highly disturbed by rodents or vandals may forego this process and simply be discarded. The artifacts trapped in the screen are placed in a bag. Each bag is then carefully labeled with a code which will later enable the archaeologist to reconstruct the exact position of the materials in relation to other artifacts and to the features of the site. Features include such things as fire hearths, pits, structures, and the strata themselves, the non-portable constituents of the archaeological site. Throughout the excavation, careful notes are kept. Each feature receives a number, as does each lot of artifacts. Features are located both vertically, here by cultural strata, and horizontally by a grid system of 1-meter squares. And the excavating process itself is chronicled in detail. To determine how old many of the features are, organic material, usually charcoal, is collected whenever possible for radiocarbon dating. Inorganic items, such as stone tools, which are not themselves datable by this method, may be dated by association. A tool found in the same stratum as a piece of charcoal dating to approximately 5,000 years ago is of about the same age. Bulk samples of the fill were also collected to later be analyzed in the laboratory. The fill contains plant remains which are valuable clues to past climates and to the uses of various plants by those who occupied the shelter. Human skeletal remains are not often encountered in excavations such as this one. Since the archaic peoples who lived at Sudden Shelter are not the known ancestors of any local group of historic Indians, these remains provide the only clues to their physical type, as well as their general health and nutrition. 2 skeletons were uncovered, one an aged woman and the other a juvenile, both having died about 6,400 years ago. The juvenile died at an age of 3 or 4, while the woman died when she was perhaps 50 or 55 years old. She had given birth to several children in her life and suffered from chronic anemia and debilitating arthritis at her death. After removal from the context of the site, artifacts and other materials are taken to the laboratory. Here they are usually washed, individually labeled, and separated into general classes, such as lithics, bone, radiocarbon, and soil samples. The painstaking analysis of the recovered materials reveals facts about the people who occupied Sudden Shelter and about the activities that they performed during their visit. These facts form an incomplete picture, but are the primary clues available to the archaeologist for understanding the desert archaic lifeway. Contained in the collected soil samples are minute pollen grains which were scattered by the plants growing in the immediate vicinity of the site and were also dropped by the plants brought in by the inhabitants. Complex techniques are used to extract the pollen from the soil. The extracted material is placed on slides and identified by microscopic examination. The analysis revealed significant changes through time in the amount of pine tree pollen, suggesting variations in the amount of moisture available to support the local pine forest. Clues as to how this changing climate affected the use of the site are provided by other analysis. Plant fragments are separated from soil samples in a water bath. The fragments float to the surface and are collected for identification. The seeds and plant parts are examined under the microscope and can often be classified by species. The analysis revealed significant changes from stratum to stratum in the use of the common species, and the presence of ground stone tools suggests the use of seeds for food throughout the occupational history of the site. Animal bones, additional remains of ancient meals, are also the focus of much analysis. Most bones, unless badly broken, can be identified by species. At Sudden Shelter, dramatic shifts occurred in the types of animals eaten. Mule deer, bighorn sheep, and cottontail rabbit replaced each other as the principal meat source. Bones also provide evidence about the seasonal use of the site, indicate a spring through fall occupation. Analysis of the stone or lithic artifacts and waste flakes also help us understand the range of activities that occurred at the site in the past. Artifacts, such as projectile points and flake knives, indicate that hunting and the subsequent processing of animal remains were undertaken at Sudden Shelter. Some lithic artifact classes, most notably projectile points, may be categorized by their shapes into stylistic types. It has been learned that many of them were manufactured only during certain periods, But if projectile points are found where organic samples are not available for radiocarbon dating, then estimated dates may be assigned based simply on the presence of a projectile point of a known temporal span. Numerous other stone tool types occur, but unlike projectile points, their functions cannot always be determined by their shapes. The microscopic examination of the working edge of a tool can reveal the manner of its use and the nature of the material upon which it was used. For example, when a tool is examined under a microscope, various wear patterns are observed, which indicate the type of material that was used upon. The analysis of debitides, which are the waste flakes produced during the manufacture of lithic tools, aids in understanding the technological activities which took place at Sudden Shelter. The flakes resulting from each stage during the manufacturing process are recognizably different. Analysis thus reveals the range of stages which occurred at various times and locations at the site. All of the analysis produces a mass of data which must be integrated to provide a coherent picture of prehistoric life at Sudden Shelter. This synthesis required the use of the computer to reveal complex associations among the types of artifactual and non-artifactual remains. Several patterns emerged as the environmental and artifactual information were compared. These patterns lead us to interpret three distinct periods of use of Sudden Shelter called components. The bottom 7 strata of the site and earliest components date from approximately 8,500 to 6,500 years ago. During this period, the inhabitants relied heavily on the hunting of mule deer. The quantities of artifacts of all types increased dramatically later in the component, suggesting increased usage of the site. The environmental analysis indicates that the increase in use of the site was paralleled by minor increase in precipitation, which apparently made the local environment more productive for edible sources. This trend was dramatically reversed after 6,400 years ago, the beginning of the second component. The intensity of use of the shelter drops considerably, and there is a significant shift in the types and quantities of artifacts. An increase in ground stone implements and fire pits, together with a decrease in projectile points and bone tools, would indicate a greater emphasis on plant foods. Hunting, although of reduced importance, becomes focused on cottontail rabbits. And as in the earlier component, the use of the site increases over time, paralleled by increases in precipitation, peaking at about 4,800 years ago. The cycle continues into the third component of the site. By 4,600 years ago, the shelter was all but abandoned. The artifactual remains of those who slowly began visiting the site are different. The artifact inventory suggests a greater balance than in previous components between plant gathering and big game hunting. Also, the dependence on bighorn sheep increased compared to mule deer and rabbits during this time. Occupation of the site appears to have been very sparse since 3,000 years ago. However, much of the evidence of this period has been destroyed by vandals digging in the site. Because of moisture at Sudden Shelter, many artifacts were not recovered. However, the more perishable items of the desert archaic culture have been found elsewhere in dry caves, which aid in understanding the activities that occurred at the site in the past. This archaic lifeway is different from the lifeway of the Paleo-Indians who hunted large large, now extinct games such as the mammoth before 9,000 years ago. The Archaic lifeway is also different from the later Fremont groups that grew corn and beans and lived in permanent houses. Their lifeway of hunting and collecting relied upon seasonal movements among a range of ecozones. Movement from the sagebrush deserts to the pinyon juniper forest and then to the alpine forest. This movement is often referred to as the annual round. Sudden Shelter was but one stop on this annual movement for the local inhabitants. The groups who periodically resided in the shelter apparently numbered less than 25 individuals, perhaps the members of 3 or 4 families. Thus, excavations such as those at Sudden Shelter allow scientists to examine the relationship between people who live by hunting and gathering and their environment. We now know more about the lifeway of the Archaic peoples than we did before the excavation of Sudden Shelter, yet we still know little about the general processes that conditioned their behavior. Anthropologists are currently developing theories about those processes that will greatly increase our understanding of human behavior. It is our responsibility to ensure that the intact archaeological sites will be available for excavation as these theories are developed. For this reason, portions of Sudden Shelter were deeply buried and remain preserved for future research. Someday, Sudden Shelter will again be excavated and will again make significant contributions to our understanding of the desert Archaic culture.